Hi class, it's me again. We're talking today about Chapter 7, Talk Through in Adolescent Development, FHS 1230, and today's topic is work, leisure, and the media. So how much free time did you have when you were a teenager? I hope you're not still a teenager, but if you are, then you don't have far to think. But when you think about it, most people view adolescents as either so totally busy that they have zero free time, or those who do nothing and have a ton of free time. But there are actually three types. Um, there are those that have many activities, who have, sports and non-sports, and have a lot of interest and do a lot of extracurricular things. There is another type who focuses on one activity, let's say ballet or dance, and that's where their main focus and all their time goes. And then there are those who don't do any activities. Which one were you? Let's look then at adolescents who work, because that'll have a lot to do with your free time. Actually, since um, since 2000 probably, teenage adolescent workers has declined in our country. And so we were thinking, why? And more teens are now seeking college admission. So if you're thinking of going to college, then you take harder classes, you spend more time on your homework, you're focused on good grades so that you can, hopefully get a scholarship or to have some type of help with your college, and you hope to get in. Some colleges are very competitive and it's very difficult to get in. The second one is the economic recession left a lot of adults without jobs. And so if you had a choice as an employer to work with, you know, adults or teenagers, usually you would pick the adult. And so teenagers figure, oh, then I don't need to do that. Um, and since COVID, think about what changes you've seen in our job market, because it's been huge. And now they're saying, we don't have enough workers, and it's a job seekers market and stuff like that. So that has a lot to do with who works and who doesn't. What about employment? So when social scientists studied employment um, and how it affects adolescent development, they thought of a couple things. They said, does working develop responsibility? Well, you would think, of course, because, you have to be responsible, you have to get there on time and everything. But they found when they did their studies that the answer is not really. That most teens, already got places on time if they needed to be, and they didn't really manage their money really well, so it wasn't that much of a responsibility. Then they asked, does working interfere with school? And if you work more than 20 hours, yes, it tends to do that. Because when you think about it, 20 hours, if you're going Monday through Friday, is 4 hours a day, and that's a lot to work. A lot of times people did most of their working on the weekends, which takes you away from studying and your family and your friends. So they say that working 20 hours or less is okay. Does working promote undesirable behavior? Well, that was kind of a difficult one because most people are exposed to alcohol and smoking and crude language and things like that when you start to work. But it doesn't necessarily promote the undesirable behavior because most teens either already were doing that or they're just not interested in doing it, and people at work doing it don't make that much of a difference. So the takeaway from this is it all depends on the nature of the job, how much you work, what type of environment you're in, and how strict your boss is, how much you enjoy what you're doing, and all sorts of those types of things. What's really interesting is where teens spend their free time and what their mood is when they're in it. So there are three types of relationships. There are leisure time with friends, or spending it with family, or alone. And which do you think their moods would be the highest? And then which the lowest and which the middle? So if you put them in order, you find that, as expected, teens' moods are better when they're with their friends, and then in the middle with their family, and the third alone. Okay, let's look at structured leisure time. Now, the other was unstructured, kind of hanging out type of thing. Think about the pros and cons of participating in extracurricular activities. Maybe think about the ones that you participated in, and maybe they had a good part and a bad part. Social scientists figure that 85% of teens participate in extracurricular activities. And the positives, my neighbor's building a chicken coop, by the way, usually with extracurricular activities, they usually come from more affluent families. The smaller the school, the more extracurricular activities they participate in, and we learned that from our last chapter. Most of them have parent support, and these include school performances like plays and stuff, not just sports and stuff. People who participate in extracurricular activities have increased college enrollment and a reduced dropout and less drug use, thank goodness, and more positive adult role models in their life. So if you think back to your extracurricular activities, they may or may not have helped. And the one that I really like is the better mental health. And I don't know if it's because you are participating in a group, so you feel like you're part of everything. The cons on that are it takes longer to graduate. Sometimes, especially in college, if you're doing a sport or an extracurricular type of thing, you can only take so many credit hours. Like my son was a wrestler in college, and they could only take 12 credit hours at a time. So, of course, it took him longer to graduate. There is some drug use and delinquency. They found especially in football and aggressive activities, because you will hang out with these people after school until your practice time or after practice. And of course, injury is a possibility. And some people are not into competition, and it gets too competitive for them. So you have to think of the pros and cons for yourself and kind of weigh those issues. Unstructured leisure time, which means nobody's watching you kind of thing. There's not a coach, there's not your mom. When did you get in the most trouble as a teenager? And what's really interesting is after school is probably the most common time that teenagers get in trouble. There's an absence of adult supervision, which usually equals problem behavior. If nobody's watching you, you do what you want. And it's not always a positive thing. The other reason why after school is a problem time is because a lot of the positive role model students are doing extracurricular activities at that time. So when did most of your problems happen? Think about that. And there are programs that are trying to produce more positive youth, and they're called positive youth development programs, obviously. Things like the YMCA, the 4-H, drama, clubs that they have in the community and stuff like that. And social scientists, of course, have studied those and found that there are 5 C's in positive youth development. By the way, don't memorize the 5. But youth development programs, just as a definition, are not just adult-led programs, which they are, but that they need to have the adult with you when you're doing whatever it is you're doing. They don't just let you go there and you play, because that's more like childcare. I don't know if you can see these. Competence, confidence, connection, character, caring, and compassion. So these adults are modeling these behaviors, not just letting you run wild and do whatever you want. And what helps teens be successful in these programs? Most people, I think of these as you do these before you're a teenager, because more as a babysitting type of thing or something to do after school. But once you're a teenager and you're in these programs, you tend to be the leaders. You tend to then treat it more as a job, and then you get the benefits of being a leader. There's a section in your book that is huge on screen time. Think about how long your screen time is. I know several years ago when I had a knee replacement, I played a lot on my iPad, and every week it gives me a new thing like, your screen time increased 24%. And one time I was like up to 6 hours, which freaked me out, and so I quit. But a lot of teens now, between phones, iPads, and things like that, computer work, have a lot of screen time. Do teens have more screen time than adults? Usually. Okay, so there are some negatives. About 3/4 of Americans now subscribe to streaming services and stuff. 93% of teenagers go online every single day. And probably a third of adolescents say they're on the internet constantly. And so we think of some of the negatives as the amount of time you're on, but it's not as much the amount of time as what you're doing when you're on the screen. And think about some of the negative things that you've noticed in your life caused by or exacerbated by screen time. You have exposure to sex, violence, alcohol, cigarettes, and drugs, which you may or may not have in your regular life, and certainly not as often. And they found that if you have exposure to violence in childhood, you have a more tendency to have aggressive behavior as a teenager. And it doesn't really, the exposure to these things doesn't mean that you're going to turn out to be a rotten person or that that's going to dominate your life, because you can balance it with good family life and good friends, and it seems to not have as big of an influence that way. When you think of social media, you can't just say social media is a positive thing or social media is a negative thing. It depends on what you're doing, how you're doing it, when you're doing it, and of course, how long. And they have found that modern use is not very detrimental. There's a large section on social media and media use at the end of your chapter. I mean, there's a huge section that you should read over and see the effect that social media and other forms of media are having on you. As far as your test questions, this is the last slide, but I want you to go through and read the media parts in addition to this for your own benefit, not necessarily for the test. Okay, thanks.